there is this continuing this gradual increase in desire to be individual. I mean, individuality is huge among, I think, our generation especially. And I think that a really unfortunate byproduct of that is that less people in my generation are attending church.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen, and it's part of the special series that we do on what makes youth tick, actually, and where we try to find out, what makes you, get out of bed in the morning, and what do you aspire to? Why are you studying what you study? And the reason that we do this podcast is to to share with NGOs like ours, what drives young people. And I think that's really something that a lot of organizations like mine are interested in, because they, especially the older ones, don't necessarily have figured that out. So hopefully that will be helpful for them. But for my organization, it's also helpful because we are working on a couple of strategies in how to really connect better with students and the younger generation. So maybe we can go around. Brigitte, would like to start first. Just say your name and where you're based, and then we go to the next.
Yeah, hi, my name is Brigitte Nelson, and I am based out of DC for the most part. So DC metro area is what I'll say.
Okay, and what do you study? Or are you working?
Yeah, so I work at the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, and I graduated in 2022 with a degree in community development from Indiana Wesleyan University.
Hi, my name is Josh Kapusinski. I'm currently living in Fairfax, Virginia, and I also work at the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities as a communications fellow. I graduated from Grove City College earlier this year with a degree in English, and at least in DC for the next 9 months.
Okay. Jonathan?
My name is Jonathan Schimpf. I am also working for the CCCU. I'm their government relations fellow, and I am originally from the Philadelphia area, but currently living in Potomac, Maryland. And I graduated from Covenant College in May of this year with a degree in sociology.
Okay, you're all done. So we have one who's not done yet. Diana.
Yeah, hi. I'm Diana. I work with Maurice at CWS. I work in the Innovation Hub as the community engagement manager. I've been in this role for about 8-9 years now. And I also am, well, I guess you guys aren't getting your degrees also, but I'm in my last semester right now, getting my master's. I'm based in New York City, so I'm getting my degree there in international relations. But funny enough, right now I am currently in Bethesda, so we're we're all neighbors.
Yeah, so I don't know who would like to start, but my first question for you is, what makes you tick? What drives you in life? What makes it that you get out of bed in the morning and start your day? Who would like to kick this off?
I mean, I can start and kind of just jump in.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Jonathan,
that
just for the listeners.
Yeah, I think that for me, I don't know. I don't think about it so much as what makes me get out of bed in the morning. I mean, I guess being very literal here, what makes me get out of bed in the morning are the responsibilities that I have. But I think that those responsibilities were, in one capacity or another, like I decided for myself. So I decided these are responsibilities that I would have that would, get me out of bed in the morning. So whether that's my job, I took this position because I was interested in the work that I was doing, or I chose a school that I was passionate about their mission. I was passionate about what I was studying. And so I guess in a sense that's a little bit more specific to me, I guess, the kind of common denominator in both of those examples is a focus on the gifts that I have that I can use to help other people, whether that's in a very tangible way, such as volunteering, for instance, or whether it is learning how to utilize gifts that I have, or skill sets that I've acquired, and building on them to learn how to better help other people with them.
And Jonathan, if I piggyback a little bit on helping others, is that something, when did that start? Is it something that, your caretakers, educated you with, gave that to you, or, was there a moment in your life where you realized, this is what I would like to do. This is important for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I kind of have like a specific example, maybe even a testimony of sorts, that kind of answers that question. I think I've been involved in the arts for my entire life, and a lot of that world is very, very focused on self and self-image, and building your gifts and skills to serve yourself, to become the most popular, to become the most famous, to become the best at what you do, very much climbing ladders, and being seen. And I think my personality, I don't know, it just didn't lend itself to that. It was kind of exhausting after a while, and I was confident in what I was able to do, and I was pushed by a lot of people to continue moving forward, to be recognized for what I was doing and what I was able to do. But it just became exhausting for me, and I think just in experiences that I had in high school, where I was given the opportunity to work with people in the arts who were younger than me, and to teach them, that was actually, I think, a turning point for me in recognizing that it was actually a lot more rewarding for me, I think, to use my gifts in a way that was helping other people, and teaching them, kind of creating this ecosystem of sorts of here are things that I've learned. Let me pour into you and teach you how to use these gifts that you have. And yeah, it also, I mean, it takes a lot of the pressure off of, if I'm not the best, I'm nothing, which is a lot of what I think the arts world can be like sometimes. And yeah, like I said, I think that a lot of it was potentially my personality. It could be also the way that I was raised. I mean, especially like a specific like family example. I mean, my grandmother, she is a caretaker of elderly people, and I think that she raised me to be have a heart for taking care of people who are in need, and using gifts that she had to do that. And she set a really great example for me. And so I think that kind of planted a seed in me that encouraged me to do, take care of people in a similar way, just using gifts that I had that were specialized to me.
Okay, thank you. And just a quick question. So if you talk about the arts, is that music, or is that, drawing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of performing arts. So yeah, music, acting, things like that. But yeah, I mean, there's room and space for visual arts there as well.
Okay. And Brigitte, what about you? What makes you tick?
Yeah, I think just listening to Jonathan, I was just reflecting, like, even on my own background and my own upbringing a little bit, and just like my lived experience. I think what gets me up in the morning, I mean, like Jonathan said, is responsibility. Just because like there are things like in my day and in my week that are just like naturally programmed that I have to show up for and that I need to do well. But I think like a greater undertone to that is like this sense of taking care of my community and taking care of the people that I encounter like like that like yeah, as I'm encountering them, as I'm meeting them and talking to them, like being present, being engaged, being thoughtful in what I say, being thoughtful in what that person needs like in that moment, just asking questions. Yeah, I think that's something that gets me up in the morning is I think continuing to build upon like meaningful connection. Yeah, that's what I would say for me.
And is that for you something that you have been brought up with? You know, did you have examples in your family, your surroundings, and people that took care of you?
Yeah, I think just the community that the culture I was brought up in, I'm half Filipino. And so like a huge part of Filipino culture is family and community and celebration. And a lot of it's like encouragement. And so I think just being brought up in that culture was kind of already programmed in me from a young age. But then as I've just gotten older and I've just and like as my family, they're not Christians, but like I'm a Christian, and seeing like the value of Christian community and how intentional it is and like how important it is in terms of the formation of the person. I think that just kind of built upon like more of the purpose driven life of meaningful connection and community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Josh?
Yeah, for me, I always think about like just doing the work that's before me in a faithful manner. And that always gets me out of bed because I think sometimes, at least our generation, we've lost a little bit of that sense of like ordinary faithfulness and whatever our callings are. I think that's, it's a helpful thing because not all of our lives necessarily look like spectacular or extraordinary. We're often doing like the same things a lot each day. And sometimes in that we can feel like we're not really going anywhere. But I tend to think of like kind of trying to lean into that part of life and not letting the like repetitiveness of it rob me of the joy that I can get in my work and doing it faithfully, especially as a part of my faith, working for the Lord and trying to follow Jesus in that manner. Because, yeah, there's a lot going on in the world and constantly getting headlines, but I think that can get overwhelming at times. So for me, just trying to lean into the spaces that I'm in well. So.
And if I listen to the three of you, closely, your faith is very important within that, right? But it's maybe you had different journeys there. I would like to do a follow-up question with you, Brigitte, is that because you mentioned that your family was not religious, but you were, which is kind of interesting because the Philippines is known to be very, faith is very important, at least my experience in traveling to the Philippines. So can you tell a little bit on how that developed and evolved for you?
Yeah, I wish I had more time than what we have allotted for this to kind of just go like the full background of my family history and just their walk of faith. But I think in short, my family isn't the majority religion of Catholicism in the Philippines, which is typically what is associated with the Philippines is Catholics. They're kind of in a very different sector of religion that's not really like Christian based, nor is it any major world religion. But like in terms of growing up in the States and my experience with faith, my family on my bio dad's side, they're all atheists. And so there's kind of this narrative growing up of we are accepting of all religions, and like there's no religion that's bad over the other, and had a lot of different viewpoints growing up, that God could be like a tree, or God could be Buddha or Hindu, like it doesn't matter, like it's all connected. But I think it's hard to like fully describe like the moment of like that encounter, like that salvation moment, like in my faith with Jesus. Because just kind of came like later on in my life. Like I'm only 23, but like later on in like my walk of life, became a Christian when I was 17. And so that yeah, that I don't think I'm fully answering your question. I don't want to like take up too much time, but I think that for me, the last like 5, almost 6 years of walking with the Lord has just kind of shown me that there were a lot of really important values that my family instilled in me in terms of the culture. But I think that it took on more meaning as I explored my faith and as I explored Christianity, as I got to know Jesus, as I got to know the traditions of faith, of walking with the Lord. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, and what I would like to understand is, because the question, the first question is what makes you get out of bed. So basically it's a question about what makes you tick, what is your purpose, right? And so I felt and I heard that faith for all three is kind of important, a driver within that. So what I'm looking for here is, how did that come about? And what I understand from you is that a couple of years ago, so 5-6 years ago, you decided to convert. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And so how did your family react to that?
Oh, that was interesting. My mom was not happy. It caused a lot of tension. It caused like a really bad rift in our relationship the first year that I was a Christian, and I decided to go to a Christian university after graduating high school. And my mom was actually pretty accepting of that. I think she began to like understand like my autonomy as an adult. But what's been interesting is that we've had a lot of conversations about faith, and those haven't been the most productive. But what has been the most productive has actually been how my faith has changed just my actions and the way that I've talked to my mom, and how I've just begun to like understand that even though she's not a Christian, that doesn't mean I can cause condemnation on her, because like we're not supposed to cause condemnation on non-believers. But like my mom, one time she came up to me, it's like probably 2-3 years in of like being a Christian, and my mom was like, I can tell that like you have a faith and that you believe in Jesus, because the way you talk to me, the way you act towards me, your tone of voice towards me, like it's completely different. And I think that's so, I think that that's what I think any Christian believer wants, is that they see Jesus in us, in our actions and the way we interact with them. And I even think that's just how a lot of people knew the distinctions of early believers within like the first 300 years of the early church, is that people knew who Christians were based on the actions and the lives that they led, not by what they said. So I think for me, that's just kind of like how it's developed over time in terms of my family's response to me being a believer.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
Brigitte. Josh, is that something that resonates with you if you hear Brigitte talking like that?
Oh yeah. My story is very different because my dad, he was a pastor in the PCA, so his prayer was always there would never be a day where I didn't know, love, and serve the Lord. And so for me, I also went to a Christian liberal arts college. So as I've grown older, it's just been a process of more maturing in my faith and like kind of, aligning words and actions. Because I think oftentimes, that I think, we all have different journeys there. And I think certainly having other believers that keep you in check is very helpful for those moments when you don't always live out your faith that well and you need others to come alongside you to spur you on. So, but yeah. Yeah.
And what I would like to hear from you is, your dad was a pastor. So do you feel that you are walking in his footsteps, or are you creating your own path and the way you experience all of this?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a good degree where I am following in his path a lot, and there's a big part of me that wants to. I mean, I have a lot of respect for my dad. He's been very good to me, and there's also this point at which like I don't necessarily want to say that your faith necessarily like becomes your own, but you start to more have to internalize and wrestle with questions that for a long time maybe you haven't. And so I've leaned on him a lot more, but also other people. Like when I went off to college, dad's not always around. So there's other people that then you connect with and be mentored by. But I've never too much had a fixation of necessarily trying to forge my own path. I'd rather just walk on a good path. And, sometimes that's one that other people have trotted before, but also in some way, I guess you are kind of, you're living a life like all of us that's very unique to each of us, which comes with its own, unique particularities. So certainly it's a bit of both, I would say.
Okay, great. Thanks, Josh. Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I was kind of similar to Josh. I was also raised in the church. I was born into a church. I mean, my dad is not a pastor, but my mom faithfully served in the church from as long ago as I can remember. And so me and my siblings were brought up being taught to serve in the church as well. I was serving in the nursery as soon as I was like got into sixth grade. My church at the time was also very focused on outreach and missions at the time, both local and international. So I was exposed to a lot of that at a young age. We were doing homeless ministries and rehab ministries. And so, yeah, I guess even kind of going back to your original question, I think that that's kind of maybe even where I also learned like the gifts that we're given are not even our own necessarily, but they're meant to be used to serve the kingdom. So yeah.
I don't know if I heard it well, but the three of you came from different universities before this, right? Colleges. So I have a question about that, and about the community and your fellow students at those universities. If you look at them or you think back, what makes or what made them tick? Josh, you want to start?
Sure. It's a good question because I'd say it's a lot of different things. I went to a smaller school, so we had about 2,500, undergrads at a given time, and you see a lot of different majors, a lot of different, concerns that people have, either politically, um, or within the church or otherwise, passion for their fields. There was this kind of because it was a Christian school. I mean, across the whole there was like you'd expect more of a commitment to wanting to find ways to serve God's kingdoms. People would go on ICO trips to different cities and just a myriad of different ministries. But it really depends on the person. I mean, I know people that were super involved in politics, others that loved science, and it really was quite encouraging to see all these type of believers that all have very different and unique interests that suit their callings and the careers that they're stepping forward, which I thought was always cool because it's not just, we have a lot of things that were pretty similar to us, but also some beautiful differences that were like, wow, you're really good at science and I'm not that great at it. So thank goodness, we have people who are skilled at different things. So I would say, man, it depended on the person for sure. And I think like kind of you'd expect from like because at the same time it's school, and lots of people are trying to think about next steps, careers. So, like anywhere else, you do see that kind of, reflected in the student body.
Okay. Jonathan?
Yeah, I also went to a small school, small Christian liberal arts school. Not quite as big as Josh's. We had about undergrad class of about 1,000 at a time. So a lot smaller, and yeah, because of that, I mean, we also had a fairly large diversity of interests. But I think at the core, I mean, I attended Covenant College, and they had a very big, it was like a staple of their curriculum for us to really focus on vocation and what it looked like to tie our faith into vocation. We used the word calling a lot. And I think that really, as I don't know how intentional it was, but it very much seeped into every field of study at the school. So yeah, similar to Josh, I mean, we had people interested in politics and people interested in science, and then people interested in the arts and the humanities and social sciences and advocacy and all the whole spectrum. But despite that range, at the core of it all was at the end of the day, this desire to be honest and authentic in light of Scripture, and what it looks like to be an expert in your field and also be an expert in God's word. And so no matter what your calling was, it's always your primary calling to continue to be a light for God's kingdom. And I think that was a big, I mean, that was at the end of the day, it's supposed to be inspirational, and we are actively being called by the Lord. And so yeah, I think that at least in my circles, I think that desire for authenticity, and a Christ-centered authenticity and love of truth was always at the forefront of every field.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Brigitte, what about your school?
Yeah, a lot of my friends had all different interests, but I think the one thing that our university really focused on was on spiritual formation and practices. And there was a lot of conversation on the rule of life by Saint Benedict. And so talking through what does it mean to have a rule of life, what are the practices that we need in place, because those are really foundational and a pillar of our community. And there's also a really huge emphasis on trying to figure out, or trying to understand, what does God's voice sound like in your life? How do you know what's the voice of Satan versus what's the voice of God? And we would just probe with questions and in prayer about that. And so that was a really huge emphasis. I remember being really formational for me and a lot of my friends was specifically our spiritual formation office, just really emphasize the spiritual practices and what does it look like to live with God daily in the ordinary and not in these big Christian moments. Because a lot of the times, a lot of my freshmen that I work with going in, they only really encountered God, what they saw is at camps. And so I think even Josh was saying at the beginning of how do we see God in the ordinary, and how do we stay faithful in the ordinary. So I remember that being super important to me in college.
Before we go to the next topic, what I want to know is I'd like to ask you, I've been talking with a lot of folks the last 2 years about a wide range of topics, but one is about religion and spirituality in the younger generation. And, I mean, the trends, especially in Western countries, are that, the younger generation is less inclined to go to church. That doesn't mean that they, are maybe less spiritual or less religious. What do you see in your community? Are your fellow students going less to church? Is that changing? When they start going, when they leave the home and they start living on by themselves in colleges and universities, and what do you see?
I definitely, I mean, I really love this conversation because I appreciate the way that you kind of distinguish between spiritual versus religious, because I do think that especially in our generation, there is this longing, I think, in a sense, for everyone to be passionate about something and everyone to, and it ends up taking the form of spirituality in one sense or another, whether that person is Christian or whether they even subscribe to a particular religion at all. There is this longing for, how can I, for lack of a better phrase, achieve enlightenment, really. And I think that comes from this. I think that there is this continuing this gradual increase in desire to be individual. I mean, individuality is huge among, I think, our generation especially. And I think that a really unfortunate byproduct of that is that less people in my generation are attending church, because they tend to put a precedent on the fact that they can be the most spiritual by doing all of the work on their own, and not leaning on a community of others. And I think that's really sad to see, even for my friends. So for instance, even the search for a church, that process, I think that a lot of times what people fall into the trap of, which I've seen even friends of mine fall into this trap, is that they continue to visit all these different churches and then fail to find the perfect church, quote unquote, for them. And that's because the only church that is so individualized for them is, staying at home and reading what they want to read and listening to what they want to listen to. And that, I don't think that that's necessarily how the church is supposed to be. That's not how churches or any place of worship is designed. It's designed to be collective and have this emphasis on community. And so I think that big issue of people attending church less, I think that a lot of it stems from that individuality, that obsession with individuality.
Brigitte, Josh, do you resonate with what Jonathan just said, or you have another opinion?
I 100% resonate. I mean, I'm like a year out I graduated in 2022, and so I actually worked at a church this last year, and my roommate didn't attend the church that I went to, but like she went to a different church, and even just my friends, like post-grad too, we had a lot of conversations about church, and there just was always this conversation about the frustration with the church. The church isn't doing this, it's not doing that, it's not addressing this issue or this issue. The pastor's not talking about this, like at the pulpit. And again, it's like cherry picking the church, and that's not what the church, like the church isn't meant to meet the preferences of every single individual. That's not what the church is for. The church is a gathering of the body of believers to worship Jesus and to hear the community and to hear the word of God. And sometimes, like, there's going to be something that you're not going to like at church, but the point of church is the gathering of believers for the encouragement of the body of Christ. And one of the lessons that I learned working at the church that I was at was that like I was like a resident pastor, and so like in that role I went through some very frustrating moments, and I was reflecting on, I've been reflecting on this, I think, for the last like 6 months, like out of the position, that like the Lord didn't call me to be like this specific pastoral role. He called me to love the church despite all of the frustrations that I went through and despite everything that I did, because that's what we're called to do, not just as pastors, like in pastoral leadership, but as the body of believers, is that regardless of any tension, regardless of any sort of discourse or conflict that we have, we're called to love the church. Why? Because Jesus loves the church, and that's what Jesus is coming back for. Is yes, to restore the world, but to restore his bride, which is the church. And so that's something that like I've had to kind of like shift the focus on and bring clarity to like a lot of my friends, is that like this is a human institution by and large, and of course it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to fit your preferences, but what is the greater narrative that's at work here? And so it's kind of like this paradigm shift of like, I'm not gonna like yes, like maybe find a church that's going to suit you best, but like you need to stay faithful and be part of it in order to like really understand like the benefit, and yeah, just not the benefit and the ultimate goal that it's a gathering and it's supposed to support the mission of Jesus. That's just what I think as like we're having this conversation.
Yeah, what I see in some people I know is that those people that have stopped attending church is that they don't think it's intellectually credible. So they have like, well, God doesn't exist. That was more of a primitive belief that people have had, and we've surpassed that now because now we're smart and we have science. So there's that. Two, I'm much more sympathetic though. I think some people have been wounded by the church, just people within it, because the church is full of sinners and we don't get things perfectly. And I think sometimes that when you forget why you're going there and you run into those problems, that people who are genuinely hurt, they don't really have like an inclination to want to go back there. And so I can really sympathize with all of that sometimes. And then third, I think there's also just yeah, there's this kind of sense of like, commitment too. It's like, it's like it, at least in college, I remember even first getting there, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to like, I'm not just going with my parents now. I'm the one who's gonna have to find a church and start going to it. So I think you combine a lot of those three things and kind of the culture people are swimming in. And I think it takes like someone often, or to kind of really to want to get back in um to start hearing the word of God again from the pulpit when you've either had bad experiences or intellectually you just can't, find it to kind of fit in with your reason. And so you think, well, that's good for those people, but it doesn't really work, for me. And so I think once you start to talk with people, those things come out. And that's, I think, at least sometimes what I see are the three biggest reasons, where it's becoming more of a minority of, youthful churchgoers.
Great. Thanks to all of you for that. I would like to jump into, the topic, the subject that you chose to study. Yeah, why did you study what you were studying? How did that happen?
Sure. I really wanted to be an English major. One, because I really wanted to be a novelist, and that slowly over time throughout my childhood became more apparent. In second grade, I really wanted to be a storyteller. My second grade teacher, she assigned me this project to write like this one-page story of our summers. And I had recently saw this movie about like this water horse, and I was like, no, I want to write my own story. So instead of doing that, I turned in this like little like few page like story about me going on this adventure around the ocean, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So I was like, I just want to keep doing this. And so over time, that kind of like desire matured into more of a love for books and reading, and then eventually trying to write my own novel. So I thought, hey, the best way to learn more about writing would be to study the great books. But in terms of a job that typically you can do that pays the bills, that also be like teaching would be great too, getting to teach literature. So I think it has a lot of value in it as both like a form of recreation and an academic discipline. I think fiction is one of those few subjects where you get philosophy, art, and history all in one, because all literature is bound by its time to some extent, but you're also getting a writer's like artistic, um, conveying of language and all these other their views on some of life's biggest questions put into a story, and narratives hold a lot of weight on people. And so I think they're a great way to teach like lifelong truths. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to study English and hope to continue doing that at some point. So
Great. Thanks, Josh. Brigitte?
Yeah, my degree was in community development, and it was under like our theology department, which is interesting because usually developmental studies is under social sciences, but I really appreciated it because we took more of like a holistic approach to our like course of study. Again, I think just like that value of community and like having meaningful connection with community has always been really important to me, like just throughout the narrative of my life. And what I really appreciated about my program is that there was an aspect of both, like I have one foot in the nonprofit world and one foot in like the Christian ministry world, and I loved both. And what I also loved was that we weren't just like learning a lot of the concepts in class. We had like a lot of like practical applications like in our community. And so, for example, one of the ministries that like we would help with for one of our classes was this rehabilitation house for people who were in incarceration. And it was really interesting because you got to see like people being restored to like actual jobs and like had like developing skill sets and being restored to families, and men and women who were divorced were like getting remarried, and just like seeing the restoration of family. And I really loved how community development was really part of that, because it took what was seen as kind of like, oh, like these people are lost, like they're kind of this low asset to the community, but it provided them like some sort of opportunity and actually step in the world where they could actually benefit and give back to their community. And so just like seeing that work and just seeing how like you could restore human dignity to like a person was really, really valuable to me. And yeah, that's why I continued in the major and why I chose it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I had a little bit of an interesting journey with choosing sociology. I initially wanted to come in studying art and philosophy. Very different. And I was interning at an organization that was, actually kind of combining those two things. And I was working primarily in the arts with teenagers mostly. And I had a wonderful experience working with that program, but I ended up through that realizing that I had so much more of an interest in the actual, I guess, well-being of my students, and wanting to fix their social emotional issues, and just investing in them as people and giving them the attention that they may or may not have been receiving in other areas of their lives. And some of my favorite parts of that job were even just like sitting and listening to them just tell their stories. And so kind of through that, I realized that I was starting to become more interested in, maybe what would it look like for me to go into school counseling or something like that, or in a field similar, or advocacy as a whole really kind of stood out to me. That was one of my favorite parts of my job, was advocating on behalf of these students that couldn't quite do it themselves. I had a huge heart for sometimes the power struggles that's at play with teenagers and teachers or school administrators or just people that are older than them in general. I've seen instances firsthand where, just because they're under the age of 18, they're treated like, they're 10, even if they're 17. And it can be really upsetting, and they just don't always have the tools that they need to handle that and process that in a healthy way and a constructive way, which just ends up causing them to get into more trouble. And it's just a really vicious cycle, unfortunately. And so because of that, I ended up pursuing sociology to just kind of look into what might it look like to study people as a whole, to study patterns, and to use that hopefully to help people. I'm so interested in social theory and, reading a lot of theorists' takes on, why do people do this, or why might a person say this, and what does inequality have to do with all of these different dynamics and so many different social spheres. And so that's kind of how I got there. And I really loved it. One of my favorite parts of sociology was just kind of how broad it was. So you could, study sociology of anything. My senior year, I took a special interest in studying sociology of art. How does art inform us when it comes to relating to people who are different than us? And even how is art kind of a means of justice in a sense? It can be really interesting. So that's kind of how I got there.
I told you in the beginning that we are going to use this conversation to make an episode for the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And that podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I started in 2012. And I walked. I tried to raise awareness and raise funds to end hunger, poverty, and injustice. And then because of COVID, I was not able to walk with others, so I had to walk alone. So I thought, okay, maybe I can virtually walk, and that's how this podcast started. My question to you is, if you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week, within 5 to 7 days, so 15 to 20 miles a day, for which cause would you walk and why?
I would say an organization. I would say Teach for the Philippines. They're this really amazing nonprofit that provides educational resources to different barangays, so smaller towns throughout the Philippines. And it's really similar to Teach for America, where they'll train you to be a teacher and then you go in the inner cities, but they train you to teach in the Philippines. And it was started by this woman who did Teach for America, and she saw the model of it and then brought it to the Philippines. And it's just really encouraging to see how kids in poverty can get a leg up in education, because that's so much of my background and story, where my mom, she grew up in poverty in the Philippines, and education was her to get out of the Philippines, to provide opportunity for her family and for my sister and for myself. And I've always thought I've always thought about going to the Philippines to teach and to be part of it. But again, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to do next after these 9 months. But I think if I were to walk 100 miles for a cause, it would 100% be that cause, just because I support so much of their mission and the work that they do there.
For me, the first one that comes to mind is Generate Hope. They're an organization that my mom's been involved with for a while. They have a lot of these rehabilitation homes for people who have been sex trafficked, and it's one of those things that just is producing a lot of good. They have these homes where they're able to bring in these women, and they provide education for them, as well as counseling and rehabilitation. So it's a really beautiful ministry, kind of that's helping these women get back to just normal lives again after these really tragic pasts. And so that's just the first thing that comes to mind. And meeting a lot of those people and being with them, it's pretty life-changing. So I would say, that.
So thanks, Josh. For you and Brigitte, have you been involved with those organizations or any other justice or humanitarian work organization?
I guess explicitly, I've never had that much of. It's more just been a very loose involvement, just when my
Hmm.
mom's
Okay.
a few times where we've been around, like these women are gone over to the house. I've gone with her more a few times when I was back in California a long time ago.
Hmm.
But more it's been her and because she's one of the board members there, so I hear a lot about it through her. But
Okay.
I do not have any direct involvement like with Teach for the Philippines, but I did like do like smaller campaigns throughout middle
Hmm.
school and high school, like raising funds to like send school supplies to like Nepal, like to help like
Hmm.
kids who needed like education, like supplies, like but yeah, in terms of like direct involvement, like post high school, college, not really, just because like I was in school for a lot
Hmm.
of it and it's just difficult because like Teach for the Philippines, like you have to have like an undergraduate degree to participate. So not like in terms of participation, but like yeah, there have been like some other humanitarian work that like I have had some involvement in.
Okay. Jonathan?
Yeah, I can't think of one specifically off the top of my head, like a named organization, but I think that I would see myself walking for any cause that would I think really I don't know, I think kind of fight for the equality of education um for I mean really any marginalized people group, but I think especially younger people. I did a study on refugees and immigrants when I was in school, and that was just something that like really stood out to me that a lot of people don't talk about how a lot of times the children of immigrants and refugees, especially from the Middle East coming to the United States, often get pushed to the side or are kind of an afterthought when it comes to education, and they're really just left behind. And people don't really pay much mind to that or to the fact that they are still growing human beings um, just as much as any other human being who has lived here in the United States and has participated in the education system, since they were born into it. And yeah, I think that's something that yeah, it's something that it bothers me, and it's something that I would feel passionate enough to walk for.
One of the questions that I ask in my podcast is to my guests is, what worries you at the moment? And, a lot of things come up. And then another question that I have is, but where do you see hope? And actually, the majority of my guests, when I ask them that question, where do you see hope? They say in the younger generation, in the youth, in you guys. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I've had some like conversations about this. There's this research institute that I'm part of, and we talk about this question all the time of how like older generations are saying that like they see a lot of hope in Gen Z and like the generations after us. And one of the things that like I go back to as like I think of this question is like how willing Gen Z is to like ask questions and to ask for help, which is really encouraging because like we're not afraid to just like ask the questions or to just like need people like to be dependent on other people. And I think like like talking about that like feeds into like my desire for like meaningful connection and community because like in order to have like connection you need to ask those questions, you need to rely on other people. And so I that's what I see as hopeful is that I think younger generations are seeing their need for others, and I think that's what makes the difference.
Yeah, I think that I would echo what Brigitte said. I had a conversation with someone fairly recently actually about this, a relative of mine, and just talking about how bleak the world is right now and how it seems to just be continuing to grow bleaker and bleaker, and talking about all of these issues that just very much emphasize hopelessness for the future. And I remember one of the questions that he asked me was one of the statements that he made was just, he said, yeah, I'm thankful that I had kids when I did and raised them, because I can't imagine raising children in today's culture and raising them up to such a hopeless life. And he asked me, how do you feel about that? And I just told him that I think even though there is a lot of this bleak sense, my generation doesn't, I think, consistently doesn't just concede and give up. And I think that's because exactly what Brigitte was saying, that willingness to lean on other people, not just each other, inside our own generation, but intergenerationally. I think even being able to recognize the wisdom of older people. And then, I think that it's normal for anyone in any generation to say, oh, this younger generation, they're changing things and not listening to us. But I do feel like a lot of people in my generation are very willing to listen to older people's ideas, because there is a lot of, even just like looking at the ways that older generations have handled civil rights movements in years past, and ways that my generation is looking at handling specific aspects of civil rights now. I think that it can be very inspiring to look back at ways that past generations have handled civil rights. And I think that a lot of my generation sees that and is willing to kind of collaborate and take ideas from the past and then expound upon them now. I think that a bonus of our generation is the fact that we are living in a very fast-paced kind of communication era. So it's like information is just so accessible and like almost scarily so. And I think that can be abused, but I really have seen like my generation wanting to use that in a way that is getting minority voices heard, and just use that in a way that's helping people and not harming them. There's always going to be examples of technology being used to harm people, and there always will be kind of a sense of hopelessness. But I do feel like there are a lot of areas that we can find hope in, especially in my generation's willingness to just kind of put ourselves forward and put ourselves out there, even if that means, potentially humiliating ourselves. I think that it's at the expense of, or we are willing to humiliate ourselves if it means we're helping someone potentially. There's always that chance, and I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I do kind of, I do see positive things in our generation. I also see things that I'm like a bit of both, because I think no generation's perfect. I think I see a lot of people my age like very overwhelmed by all of the world's problems, and thinking that they have to like solve all of them, and that's just not realistic. I think one thing I think that our people of our generation could do is to kind of recognize their own like spheres of influence. Like, for example, I just see people worried about things that they really don't have that much of an impact over. And I think it can lead to paralysis of, well, what do I do? Do I either become very jaded and cynical in where the world is going, or do I try to get involved in everything and burn out? And I think there is a balance that has to be had there, because there is only so much you can do as one person. And yet we're often been told that you can, change the world, do whatever. And there is it's not like I don't want to put a ceiling on anyone, but I do want to think, yeah, at a certain point, you have to think realistically about what you're able to do. So I have hope, reasonable hope, I guess. It's not like that I think our generation's like, you know, overtly good or bad. I just think it's going to take, I don't know. It's not that I'm pinning all my hopes on it, if that makes sense. I think one of the things our generation is, I think, susceptible to is throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit when it comes to certain traditions, certain things that like overreactions to certain things that I think are going to require more nuance, which is hard, but it's part of the reason why we have all those conversations all the time. So that helps. But
When I listen to you, I hear a couple of words and I see a couple of things. I heard you say, Jonathan, intergenerational. There's a willingness in our generation, to continue listening to the older generation. I really think if that's happening, that's a good thing. I think, if we would all become a little bit better listeners, I think this world would be a better place. Also, the realization that we are connected, that we are in this together, I think could help this world forward. I always say, I think during COVID, the whole world realized that we are all interconnected, at least for 2 weeks, and then at the moment, some of us had access to vaccines, and then we went back to our own little worlds. But I have a question about that interconnectedness or connection, and if you think in these abstract terms into how you are connected with other communities, with other people, other parts of the world, etc. Could you come up with some positive connections and some negative connections? You can keep it close to where you're working as well. That's all good.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there are positive. I can even think of examples of both kind of positive and negative interconnectedness in the same same connection. But yeah, I think that even just for people who are my age, who are in my generation, to form connections in the workplace. So for instance, at the CCC where Brigitte, Josh, and I work, like we have people from all different walks of life and all different ages here working for the same cause. And I think that that's really a really beautiful thing, especially in the ways that we are kind of able to learn from the older folks who have been working here longer. But I also think that kind of like that workplace relationship of interconnectedness can even kind of be seen like I think that that's the reflection of the church, and what the church is supposed to be. I always think about like interconnectedness and collaboration being just such an important calling of the church, for Christians as a whole in the church. I think being able to attend church with people from so many different walks of life and people with so many different skills, like that is how the kingdom of God is meant to be. We always say, the body of Christ, and that is a helpful example because, the body has so many different parts that make it, and we know as human beings who have bodies that when one part of our body is not working as it should, we don't feel right and we're not able to perform as well. And I think that's exactly how the church is, and so it should be a call for us, no matter how old we are, no matter what generation we're in, no matter what walk of life we're in, to rally together and lift up whichever part of the body is not doing as well. I think that there are definitely negative aspects to that, though, however, which is, there is also that fear of not changing. So I think Josh made a really good point about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which I've also seen. Like that's a really bad thing that I think happens far too frequently. But I think that there is also the case where people are so set in their ways that they don't learn from their mistakes. And that can be harmful intergenerationally, you know. So for instance, if someone in, I'll just keep going with the church example, you know, if someone in the church is doing something, teaching something that is harmful, or continuing with a practice in the church that maybe is not necessarily based in scripture, but the hope is that it accomplishes something that is rooted in scripture, but it's harming people. I think that there is, we are also called as Christians to recognize our mistakes and learn from them, and then continue to move forward in a better or a different way. And so, you know, in that kind of intergenerational interconnectedness, there is the possibility that doesn't happen. And kind of looping it back to kind of the beginning of our discussion, I think that is a lot of times where I have seen personally people get wounded in the church, is when people are not willing to see the ways that things that they are doing that may or may not be rooted in tradition is actually a harmful thing, and is harming people, and actually kind of coming between them and Christ and not drawing them in closer to him.
Yeah, I think one of the things, specifically within the church, that happens is, there's a book by Jamar Tisby called The Color Compromise, and it deals with the churches, just, you know, different American churches, and they're like certain ones that didn't have great responses to lots of civil rights movements. And I think culturally, that's kind of important to this idea within certain sects. You can't speak for everyone on this, but that, you know, okay, well, Christians got this wrong. Christians are judgmental or like this. And it's hard to see things on a case by case, you know, personal value, but other ways too. I think certain traditions. I mean, Americans, we're having like a deep reckoning with history, and even just like within American history. I mean, within different humanities circles, there's always like, okay, well, who should we be reading in literature classes? Who goes in the canon? Specifically more within history, like revisionistic history. It's like, how do you teach like history well? How do you cover things that were really bad that you have to teach without offending certain people? How do you have an accurate view of history, but also trying to, you know, like shield people that have to deal with hard things? So it's not an easy thing to answer, I think, but sometimes there's this impulse, I think, especially with younger people, to want to like redo things, like we'll get it right, or kind of, I don't know, it's hard because I think race is the biggest example there, at least with certain churches, where I mean, some people's responses have caused people to walk away, whereas sometimes it could just be a bad experience.
Yeah, so we're slowly coming to the end, but I still have a couple of quick questions. You know, I hope you understand, you know, what type of organization we both work for. You know, it's an NGO, a not-for-profit organization that works on, you know, on refugee and immigration related issues, hunger, poverty, around the world, but also within the US. And, you know, we existed for quite a long time, right after the Second World War. But organizations like ours are struggling in terms of, you know, how do we connect or reconnect with the younger generation? And then I think what complicates it for a lot of faith-based organizations is that, yeah, I mean, you know, in the old days, they would find the younger generation still in the churches, but they are not there. Yeah, do you have any advice for organizations like ours on how to connect or reconnect with the younger generation?
I'd like to take that question even one step further and thinking about, yes, reconnecting, but also how can we give agency to youth to be more active themselves? And I guess that kind of goes hand in hand with reconnecting. But yeah, I am also looking at how can we better service people? How can we better service youth to give them what they need to either want to reconnect with us or to just, yeah, yeah, I guess I'll leave that there.
Yeah, it's a good question. The one thing that comes to mind for me is, again, I'm just going to refer back to this research institute that it's Springtime Research Institute, really amazing nonprofit. They're based out of Baltimore and Minnesota. One of the things that they do with us as ambassadors with the program is that they give us a 15-minute prompt each month, and it's just asking us questions of whatever the specific topic is for the year. So their specific topic this year is on sacred spaces and meaningful connection, and meaningful connection, but more in the sense of belonging, sacred spaces and belonging. And I think what's been really great is that it's a 15-minute assignment that we just email to them, and it's a great way to stay engaged with what they're doing, but then it also gives them feedback on what are the resources that we can bring for younger generations, because the ambassador group is students between the ages of 13 to 25, and so it's a pretty good chunk of development that you have of different voices. And so I feel that system has been super helpful in terms of we're providing them feedback, but then they're also providing us resources, because they follow up the next month with something to follow up from their previous question. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I hope that helps. But yeah, that's just an example that I see that that I'm doing right now that has been really engaging for me.
Yeah, I don't know. This is actually a fairly difficult question for me to answer, I think. But and I don't know how helpful my answer will be either, but it's something that at least really I think is always just a good philosophy for NGOs drawing in young people is I think that the best way to find young people is just being very forthright and honest about your mission. Because I think that I've seen organizations try to be something that they're not so that they can get the type of person that they're looking for. But what happens then is that they get, young people who think they're signing up for something completely different, and then they don't stay, or they are not putting in the type of effort that they should be. Not necessarily, I don't know if I would use the word lied to, if that might be too strong, but because they were expecting a different mission. And I think that it might be unfortunate that, it is unfortunate that my generation is having less and less interest in organizations like ours. But just because there's less doesn't mean that there's none at all. And I think that those few are very interested in this type of work, and they want to find organizations that do align with this mission that is dying out. And I think that, even in my experience, when you are the quieter voice, I think that it can be disheartening at times, but I think that it also can be really, it can be also really empowering, to kind of drive you to, yes, I might be the quieter voice, I might be the smaller part of the population, but what can I do? What resources can I pull to get my voice heard, and to get the voice heard of others who are in this smaller demographic? And so yeah, I think authenticity, first and foremost, when it comes to organizations presenting themselves, is something that's really attractive.
Thanks, Jonathan. Josh, anything to add?
Yeah, just briefly, I'd add that I think if younger people, if they feel like they're, within reason, there's always a learning curve to these things, but if they genuinely feel like, oh, I have something to offer here, or there's a unique input that I can have, that goes a long way if they feel seen that way. And so I think extending that to them clearly, that invitation, hey, we want you here, and we think that there's a lot that you can help us with. I think young people are kind of yearning to have that kind of like impact or to feel like what they're doing matters. And so kind of communicating that to them, I think, is really helpful, at least in, if starting a new job here, it always helps to kind of have that from, people that you look up to and you're, working with. So I would say that would hold true for them as well.
Thanks, Josh. Brigitte, I mean, piggybacking what you said in terms of the organization that asks you to send an email, that you give inputs to a discussion. I've also heard that folks within NGOs like mine, like ours, have said, what about setting up a youth advisory council that you will ask 4 to 6 times a year to be in a conversation like we are now, for an hour or a half, 30 minutes. Would you sign up for that?
100%. That's literally what I'm doing with Springtide is like I recorded a podcast episode with them this summer. Like, so conversation like this, like that we're doing, like we do that. And like, we have like monthly meetings for like an hour and a half. And we just go over, because it's research based, because like we're looking at like religion identity and Gen Z. And then there's other subtopics that go with that. And so like, yeah, I don't know, like I really appreciate the model because like it feels, I feel more engaged and like there's more of like this, like I think what Josh said, sorry, I always mix up the J's. Josh was saying of like the youth want to be part of something like bigger than themselves and to like have that sense of meaning and purpose that they're actually contributing to something. Like that's huge because like that feeds into like meaning and purpose and like each of us like wants that and like desires that. And so like I feel like having a youth advisory council ambassador program, whatever it is you want to call it, I think it one like supports your NGO or in your nonprofit, but then two, it also provides like purpose for like that student that's part of it. And then 3, keeps them engaged. And then when they're engaged, they talk about it with their friends, they post about it on social media. So then like it's like this grassroots movement that like begins to form because from that engagement.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brigitte. I mean, another idea that came up is why would we put after we have done 4 to 8 of these round tables, why would you put it in a questionnaire? Why don't you ask the people that you've spoken with to facilitate these type of discussions by themselves and then report back? So we've also discussed that particular possibility. Thanks. Josh, Jonathan, anything to add to this? No? Jonathan?
I mean, I would agree with everything Brigitte said.
Okay. Diana, any questions from your side?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think I really love what all of you guys were saying. I think you guys have given us some really good, interesting things to think about, and I really appreciate it. But yeah, no, I think I'm all good on my end.
Okay, then I would like to thank all of you for your willingness to talk with us, to share your opinion and experiences. It was really great. I enjoyed it. But thank you so much, and yeah, good luck with everything you do.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Thanks, Diana. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.